The holidays had always been a time of warmth, love, and family gatherings. At least, that's what I believed. But one cruel remark from my daughter-in-law shattered the illusion. As I sit here reflecting on that moment, I realize how deeply it cut me. It wasn't just about Christmas, it was about my place in their world, a world where I no longer belonged. But what happens when you've been pushed too far? When your heart breaks and you find the strength to rise again? This is my story, and trust me, it's one you won't forget. Subscribe now and let me know where you're watching from. This is only the beginning. I had never expected this. Christmas, the time of year when families come together, celebrating love and togetherness, or so I thought. It was my son, Daniel, who'd suggested I spend the holiday with them. His wife, Laura, came from a wealthy family, but I never thought that would be a problem. I'm just a simple woman, 74 years old, living quietly in my little house by the sea, surrounded by the sounds of the waves and my 2 cats. That had been enough for me. Peace, simplicity, and the memory of my late husband. I thought I understood my place in the world. I was wrong. That year, Daniel had decided to spend Christmas with Laura's family, in their lavish home. At first, I thought they were just being polite when they asked me to join them. But then Laura, with her icy, superior smile, spoke the words that would change everything. "You just don't fit in with my family, Sophie," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're too old, too simple. It's just not the right setting for you." I stared at her, the woman who had married my son, the woman I had tried so hard to accept, even though she had made it clear she didn't care about me. I felt my throat tighten as she dismissed me like I was some inconvenience. And Daniel? He just stood there, silent, his eyes avoiding mine. It was as if he had already made his choice. His loyalty was with Laura, and I was no longer a part of their life. I wanted to argue, to fight back, but I couldn't find my voice. Instead, Daniel, my own son, told me in a soft voice, "I'm sorry. Mom, Laura thinks it's better if you don't come." And just like that, I was out. I wasn't welcome, alone. I didn't cry that night. I held back my tears, telling myself it was fine. I could spend the holiday alone. After all, I had my cats. But inside, something broke. I had been cast aside, a relic of the past, unwanted and unloved. The house felt emptier that evening. The silence seemed louder than ever. I tried to distract myself with my usual routine, but it wasn't the same without my son, without any of them. That night, my phone rang. It was one of my old friends, Margaret. She had heard about what had happened. "Sophie," she said, her voice warm and comforting, "we're coming over. Don't you dare sit there alone. We'll bring Christmas to you." And they did. Margaret, along with a few other friends who had shared so many of life's ups and downs with me, arrived later that evening, carrying food, laughter, and most importantly, company. As we sat around the table, eating and chatting, I mentioned the house of dreams that my late husband and I had worked so hard to buy, the beach house. It had always been my plan to leave it to Daniel. After all, he was my son. It was his legacy too. But in that moment, surrounded by my friends, I realized something. Maybe Daniel didn't deserve it. Maybe Laura didn't deserve it. I had worked my entire life for that house, and now it felt like they were taking more from me than just my place at the table. They were taking my dignity. One of my friends, Anna, looked at me with kind eyes. "Sophie, you've earned that house. You don't owe them anything, especially not after the way they treated you." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was as if I had been blind this whole time. I had thought that giving Daniel the house would be a gift, a way of showing him how much I loved him. But love was supposed to be mutual, wasn't it? And he didn't love me. Not in the way that mattered. I felt a spark inside me, a decision forming. I wasn't going to give him the house, not anymore. That night, after my friends left, I took a long, hard look at the will I had written years ago. It had always been for Daniel. But now, the thought of him inheriting it felt wrong. I wasn't going to let him take what wasn't his. It was mine, and I was going to take control of it. And so, the seed of revenge was planted. I would make them understand the cost of their cruelty. Sophie would no longer be the woman who was easily overlooked. The holiday wasn't just over for me. It was the beginning of something else. As I sit here, reflecting on that cold Christmas night, I wonder how I let things go on for so long. How did I let myself become invisible? Maybe I thought that family, blood, would always matter. But it didn't. Not to Laura. Not to Daniel. And as I prepared to change my will, to take back what was rightfully mine, I knew that it wasn't just the house I was reclaiming. It was my dignity, my power. What would happen next? Would Daniel fight me? Would Laura get her way? Or would I finally show them what happens when you push a mother too far? I couldn't wait to find out. The night that followed Christmas felt heavier than the one before. I sat by the fire, the flames dancing in the hearth, but I couldn't escape the coldness in my heart. As I stared into the flames, my mind kept returning to that moment. The sting of Laura's words, the chill in Daniel's voice when he repeated her cruel dismissal. I'd always known that Laura didn't particularly like me, but I never imagined it would go this far. To be treated as if I were invisible in my own son's life, it was too much. I had always prided myself on my independence. The house by the sea was a symbol of that. It wasn't just a home. It was a dream realized by me and my late husband. It was our sanctuary, the place where we built a life together, and where I had planned to spend my final years in peace. But now, it felt like something was being taken from me. Not just the house, but the love I had once given freely to my son. The loneliness was suffocating. Even though I had friends who cared about me, who wanted to spend time with me, it wasn't the same. The betrayal I felt cut so deep that nothing could ease the ache. As much as I tried to convince myself that I didn't need to be with Daniel and Laura, that I was fine on my own, I couldn't stop wondering what had happened to the bond we once shared. I had been a good mother. I had supported Daniel through thick and thin, and yet, now I was discarded like yesterday's news. Later that evening, as I wandered aimlessly around the house, I noticed the dust on the piano. My husband had loved that piano. He used to sit for hours, his fingers dancing across the keys, filling the house with music. I used to listen, completely mesmerized, but tonight, the silence was deafening. The weight of it settled over me, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I couldn't let this go. I had worked my entire life, alongside my husband, to build this life. And yet, here I was, a woman of 74, left alone and humiliated by the people I had trusted most. That was when the thought hit me. The house. The one thing that could still give me a sense of power over my situation. I had always planned to leave it to Daniel, but the thought of him inheriting it after the way he had treated me made my blood run cold. Laura's cruel words echoed in my ears. You don't fit in. It was as if she had already decided my place, not just in her world, but in her family's world. No, I wasn't going to let her or Daniel have it. I had always told myself that I would leave everything to my son, that it was his inheritance. But as I thought more about it, I realized something important. Daniel hadn't earned it, not the way my husband and I had. I took a deep breath, staring out the window at the waves crashing against the rocks below. The sea had always been my solace. It had always whispered to me, reminding me of what was truly important. And right now, what was important was taking back control. The decision was made. The house would no longer be Daniel's legacy. It would be mine to keep, and I would decide what to do with it. As I sat down at my desk, I began to write. It wasn't easy. After all, I had never imagined doing something like this to my son. But this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. It was about reclaiming my dignity. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper filled the room. I signed my name with determination, crossing out the part of the will where Daniel had been named the sole heir. The house would no longer be his. For a moment, I just sat there, looking at the document in front of me. Was I doing the right thing? Should I really take this step? But then I remembered the way Laura had dismissed me, the way Daniel had stood silently by her side. That was all the justification I needed. I took the will, folded it carefully, and placed it in the drawer. My heart was racing, but there was a strange sense of calm now. I had made my choice. It wasn't just about the house. It was about making a stand. The days that followed were full of quiet tension. Daniel and Laura hadn't tried to reach out again, and I didn't expect them to. I wasn't sure when or how they would find out about the change in my will, but I knew they would. And when they did, things would never be the same again. I wasn't sure what to expect from them, but I was ready. I didn't know it yet, but this decision would lead to a confrontation that would forever change the dynamics of our family. The quiet woman who had been dismissed and disregarded would no longer stay in the shadows. Sophie was coming out of the dark, and the world would have to take notice. But for now, I just sat in silence. The house felt colder than it had before. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: empowerment. It was just the beginning, and I would make sure they knew it. I hadn't expected the change in my will to be so final. At first, there was a quiet calm after I made the decision, almost a sense of relief. I thought maybe I could live in peace with it, knowing I had taken control of the one thing that truly mattered to me. But that calm didn't last long. The day I received the call from my lawyer, I knew my quiet little world was about to be shattered. It was a few weeks after Christmas when I first noticed the change. The phone rang early one morning, the caller ID showing the name of my lawyer, Thomas. "Sophie," his voice was steady, but I could hear the unease in it. "We need to talk. It's about your will." I felt my chest tighten. I had been expecting this, but now that it was happening, I realized I wasn't as prepared as I had thought. "What about it?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my pulse quickened. There was a long pause on the other end. I think we need to review the document again," he said. "Something has changed, Sophie. I'm afraid I didn't catch it at first. There's a new clause in the will that we didn't discuss." I felt my stomach churn. "What are you talking about, Thomas?" He hesitated again. "I think you need to come in and sign some updated documents. It's about the estate, Sophie, and the house by the sea." I swallowed hard, the weight of the situation sinking in. I knew then that my son Daniel had found a way to get to Thomas. I couldn't imagine how, but it was clear that somehow my decision had been tampered with. It wasn't a coincidence that Thomas now sounded so nervous. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. I decided to go to his office immediately. The drive felt endless. I gripped the wheel tightly, my mind racing. What had they done? What had Daniel and Laura done? I had trusted Thomas. I had always felt secure in his professionalism, but now I was beginning to doubt everything. When I arrived at his office, Thomas was waiting for me, a tense smile on his face. He led me into his private office, and we sat down across from one another. "Sophie, I need to explain," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I didn't realize at first, but your son, Daniel, he's been coming in, asking for changes. I've been making them, and I didn't question it." I felt my heart drop to my stomach. "What do you mean? You've been changing my will without telling me?" I could barely speak the words. My blood was boiling. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry, Sophie. He insisted that you would want these changes, that the house should go to him, that it was what you'd always planned." I felt a sickening realization wash over me. Daniel hadn't even bothered to confront me directly. Instead, he had gone behind my back, manipulating the situation, and Thomas, who I had trusted, had been complicit in it. "How much?" I whispered, my voice shaking with anger. "How much did he pay you to betray me?" "No, Sophie, it wasn't like that," Thomas stammered, panic rising in his voice. "He didn't pay me, but he kept insisting that he was just helping you. He said you were getting forgetful, that you wanted to make things easier for everyone. And I didn't want to question it. I should have, but I didn't." I stared at him, disgusted. He was barely able to meet my gaze. My lawyer, someone I had trusted to keep my interests safe, had been swayed by my son's words. I stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back. "This is over, Thomas. I don't trust you anymore." He looked panicked, his hands raised. "Please, Sophie, let me fix this. Let me—" But I was already heading for the door. I had to get out of there. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, it all hit me like a wave, crashing over me. I was being erased. My son, the one person I had done everything for, was taking everything from me, piece by piece. I got into my car, slammed the door, and took off, my hands trembling on the wheel. I drove aimlessly for a while, my thoughts a whirl of rage and disbelief. Daniel and Laura had thought they could just take my life's work. They had underestimated me. As I drove, I thought about the house, thought about the one thing that had always been mine, the one thing that tied me to a past I would never forget. I couldn't let them have it, not after everything they'd done. When I returned home, the weight of what had happened settled heavily on me. It was clear now. I couldn't trust anyone. My son had taken a step that I couldn't undo, but I could stop him. I spent the rest of the day alone, thinking, plotting. The will could be changed again. I'd find another lawyer, one who would help me restore what had been taken. Daniel and Laura had no idea what they were up against. They had pushed me too far. I wasn't going to back down. It was time for me to take control. And this time, there would be no compromises. The days that followed were a blur of frustration and quiet anger. I had already started looking for a new lawyer. I wasn't going to let Daniel and Laura get away with this. The more I thought about it, the more the weight of their betrayal crushed me. How could they be so callous? My own flesh and blood. It hurt in a way that I hadn't expected, so deep, so personal, that it felt like something inside me was unraveling. But I had to stay focused. I couldn't let them win. I wasn't going to let them take the one thing that I had worked for, that I had fought for so many years. My husband's legacy, our legacy. The phone call came 3 days later. It was Daniel. His voice, thick with anger and perhaps a touch of guilt, echoed through the phone. "Mom, I need to talk to you. I know things have been difficult between us, but this isn't right. You need to fix the will. You can't just take the house away from me and Laura." I didn't even let him finish. "You think you can just walk back into my life and talk to me like everything is fine?" My voice trembled, but I held my ground. "You've already tried to steal from me once. What makes you think I'll give in this time?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, in that soft, pleading tone he always used when he was trying to manipulate me, he spoke again. "It's just the house, Mom. It's not about the money. It's about family. You've always said we should take care of each other. This is a family home. I thought you would want us to keep it." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "You thought wrong," I snapped. "This house is mine. It's been mine long before Laura ever came into the picture, and it will stay mine. You don't get to take it from me just because you're married to someone with a silver spoon in her mouth." He tried again, his voice rising with frustration. "Mom, this isn't fair. You can't just change everything like this. You know it's what Dad would have wanted." At that, my heart cracked. He had used my late husband's memory to guilt me, as if I didn't know what my husband would have wanted, as if I didn't know my husband's dreams as well as I knew my own. But what hurt the most was how easily Daniel had fallen into line with Laura. They'd made their plans, and I was nothing more than an obstacle in their way. "You don't know what Dad would have wanted," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You think this is about money? It's not. This is about respect, and you've lost mine." There was a long silence. Daniel, who had never been good at handling confrontation, was quiet on the other end. But when he finally spoke again, his words cut through me like a knife. "Mom, if you don't change your mind, I'll have to take action. I'll go to court. I'll make sure I get what's mine. This house should be ours, not just yours." I could hear the resolve in his voice, and it was the final straw. I wasn't surprised, but hearing him say it so bluntly, he would fight me, take me to court, and tear apart our family for the sake of a house, made my blood boil. "I'll see you in court, Daniel," I said, my voice sharp, cold. "And don't you dare call me again until you've made up your mind about whether you want a mother or a piece of property." I hung up before he could respond, throwing the phone down on the couch beside me. Tears of rage welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. No, I was done being weak, done being the one to always give in. I wasn't going to let him use me anymore. That night, I sat down and started to gather everything I needed. I made a list of documents I had to take with me to the new lawyer, made sure I had every bit of paper that could prove my right to the house. I wasn't going to let Daniel win. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I walked into the office of a new lawyer, a young man named Richard. His energy was a stark contrast to Thomas's. He was eager, determined, and sharp. He listened carefully as I laid out everything that had happened. As I spoke, I realized how much I had been holding back. The anger, the hurt, the frustration, it all came out in one rush of words, but Richard just sat there, nodding along, his face full of sympathy. "Don't worry, Sophie," he said when I finished. "You've got a strong case. If your son wants to fight, we'll fight, but we're going to do it the right way." It was the first bit of reassurance I had gotten in weeks. For the first time, I felt like someone was on my side. But even as I left Richard's office, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Daniel and Laura wouldn't give up easily, not when they had already tasted what they thought was theirs. I had no idea how far they would go to get what they wanted, but I was ready to find out. Later that evening, as I sat in my living room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had a plan now. I had a lawyer I could trust, and I had something they could never take from me, the truth. Whatever happened next, I was done being the victim. I was ready to take back what was mine, and I would make them regret ever crossing me. The days bled into each other, but the weight of what was coming never left me. My mind raced constantly, through every meeting with Richard, every conversation with my lawyer, and every thought of how this battle would unfold. I was preparing for war, but I knew it would be a long, painful fight. Daniel's words had echoed in my ears, each one sharpening the resolve in my chest. "I'll take action," he'd said. "I'll go to court." I didn't doubt that for a second. He wasn't the boy I raised anymore. The man standing before me was cold, calculating, willing to tear down everything for his own benefit. What hurt the most, though, wasn't that Daniel was trying to take the house. It was that he was willing to throw me away, his own mother, without so much as a second thought. Laura had done a good job of turning him against me, of making him believe that I was some kind of burden, a relic of the past, but I knew my son better than anyone else. I knew that deep down, this wasn't just about the house. This was about power, control, and he was too blind to see it. The day he called again, I wasn't surprised. "Mom, we need to talk." Daniel's voice came through the phone, as soft as ever. But beneath it was an edge, anger, frustration, and something colder. "I've spoken to a lawyer, and if you don't change the will, this is going to get ugly. You won't win." I could hear Laura's voice in the background, her influence weaving its way into every word he spoke. It was clear now. He wasn't just defending the house, he was defending his wife's interests. And it sickened me. "I told you before, Daniel," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "I'm not changing my mind. You think you can scare me into doing what you want? It won't work. I've seen the real you now." There was silence on the other end. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Mom, I don't want to do this, but you're forcing me to. This isn't just about the house. It's about what's right, what Dad would have wanted." I nearly lost my composure, but I held firm. "You're right. This isn't just about the house. It's about respect, Daniel. Something you and your wife have taken from me. Something I won't give up without a fight. I'm not asking you to give it up." Daniel's voice was strained, like he was trying to keep his emotions in check. "But I'm telling you, you'll lose in court. I'm not going to let you ruin everything for me and Laura. I won't let you keep the house from us." His words stung. He had reduced everything down to money, to inheritance, to something so trivial. I wanted to remind him of the love we'd shared, of the years we spent together, but I knew it would fall on deaf ears. He'd made his choice, and now, so had I. "I've already made my decision, Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion but steady, "and I'm not changing it. So do what you have to do. I'll be ready." I hung up before he could say anything more. The silence in the house was deafening. For the first time in months, I let myself feel the weight of it all. The betrayal, the lies, the fact that my own flesh and blood was willing to tear our family apart over something so petty. It was as if he had become a stranger. The boy who once needed me, the son who had looked to me for guidance, was gone. In his place was a man who cared only for himself, for his wife, for the inheritance that he believed was rightfully his. I sat there for a long time, the house feeling more empty than ever. My heart ached in a way it never had before. The love I had for my son had been twisted into something unrecognizable, and it was breaking me. But I wouldn't give in. I couldn't. I couldn't let him think that he could just walk all over me. I was done being the victim. Over the next few days, I focused all my energy on preparing for the inevitable. Richard and I met several more times, reviewing documents, ensuring everything was in order for the court battle that was coming. My heart wasn't in it, not like it used to be when I'd taken care of my family, but I pushed through the pain. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for my dignity, for the respect I deserved, and I wouldn't let Daniel take that from me. As I sat in Richard's office, listening to him explain the next steps, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. I was scared. Scared of losing everything. Scared of the toll this would take on me. Scared of the family I had once known being completely destroyed. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I couldn't back down now. I wouldn't. That night I went to bed early, the quiet of the house almost suffocating. I closed my eyes, but the image of Daniel's face, so determined, so angry, wouldn't leave me. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. "I'll win, Mom. "You'll lose." I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. The next morning, I woke with a new resolve. I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. I had come too far to give up now. This was more than just a fight for the house. It was about taking back my life, my voice, my place in the world. I would do whatever it took to win this battle. For myself, for the woman I used to be, and for the mother I had always been to Daniel. But I had no idea how far Daniel would go to make sure I lost. The tension was thick in the air. Every day seemed to drag on longer than the last. I kept my focus on the legal battle ahead, but a part of me, deep down, was dreading what it would do to the already fragile bond I had with Daniel. I had raised him, loved him, and fought for him when no one else would. And now, here he was, threatening me over a house that had no meaning to him beyond the wealth it represented. It was crushing. The phone call came a week later. I'd been bracing myself for it, but that didn't make it any easier. It was Thomas, my old lawyer, the one who had betrayed me. "Sophie, I'm so sorry about everything that's happened," Thomas began, his voice shaky. "I should have listened to you. I should have questioned Daniel and Laura, but I didn't. And now it's too late." I felt the familiar fire of anger rising in me, but I forced myself to keep my voice calm. "What do you want, Thomas? I've already made my decision. I don't need any more apologies." "I know," he said quietly, "but I need to tell you something. Daniel, he's been coming to me. He's offering me money to change the will, to make it look like it was all a mistake. He's been pressuring me, and I gave in, but I can't live with it anymore. I'm not the man I thought I was, Sophie." I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the anger and disappointment roll over me in waves. I had known something wasn't right about his sudden change in behavior. He wasn't the man I had trusted. He was just another piece of Daniel's puzzle, another pawn in his game. "So, what do you want me to do now, Thomas?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the hurt too much to contain. "I want to help you," he said. "I've already started making things right. I'm going to testify on your behalf. I'm going to tell the truth. I'll make sure Daniel doesn't get away with this." I took a long, slow breath. A part of me wanted to scream at him for his betrayal, for not standing up for me sooner. But the other part of me, the part that still wanted to believe there was some good in him, felt a small flicker of hope. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Thomas," I said softly, "but I'll take your help. It's the only chance I've got left." "I understand," he replied. "I'll be there. I'll do everything I can to make this right." As the conversation ended, I sat in silence, staring out the window at the waves crashing against the shore below. The pain was still there, like a wound that hadn't healed, but now there was something else too, something stronger, determination. I was going to take back control of my life, and if Daniel thought he could manipulate me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The days turned into weeks as the court date loomed closer. I met with Richard, my new lawyer, more times than I cared to count. He worked tirelessly on my case, poring over documents, building the evidence, preparing for the battle that was about to unfold. But even with all the preparation, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was at stake. Daniel's threats still echoed in my mind. He was determined to take everything from me, my home, my dignity, my future, but I wasn't going to let him. I had already lost so much, but I wasn't going to lose this fight, not after everything he'd done. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, the way Daniel had dismissed me, the way Laura had undermined me at every turn. I could still see their faces, their smug expressions as they tried to strip away everything I held dear. But I wasn't just going to give up. I had made my decision, and I was going to see it through. I spent that night in quiet contemplation, looking out at the ocean as the wind whispered through the trees. The sea had always been my refuge, a place where I could find peace, even when the world around me felt like it was crumbling. But tomorrow, it would all change. The house, the will, the battle, it would all come to a head. I took one last look at my home, the place where I had spent so many years of my life. It was mine. It always had been. And no one was going to take it from me. The morning of the court hearing arrived, cold and gray, as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, trying to steady my nerves. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the collar of my jacket. the weight of the impending battle settling heavily in my chest. Today wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a fight for my dignity, a fight for my right to be heard, to be seen, to be respected. The house, my home, had been more than just a building to me. It had been a symbol of everything my late husband and I had worked for. It was where we had built our lives, where we had laughed, cried, and loved. But now, it had become a battleground, the prize in a war that had been thrust upon me by the very people I had once trusted most. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and grabbed my purse. As I made my way out of the house, I couldn't help but glance back at it one last time. I wasn't sure what would happen today, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't give up without a fight. The drive to the courthouse felt like it took forever. Each turn, each mile, was another reminder of what was at stake. I thought about Daniel, about Laura. I thought about all the years I had spent raising my son, loving him, supporting him, and how quickly they had discarded me. It hurt more than I could ever explain, but I had no time for self-pity. This was war, and today I was going to win. When I arrived at the courthouse, I was greeted by Richard, my new lawyer. His presence gave me a small sense of comfort, though I could see the same tension in his eyes that I felt in my own chest. We exchanged a few words, but I could tell that he was focused on the task ahead. This wasn't going to be an easy fight, but we were ready. The courtroom was already crowded when we entered. Daniel and Laura were seated across the room, their expressions cold and distant. I could see how tightly Laura gripped Daniel's hand, as if she were trying to reassure him that they would win. But I wasn't worried. I had seen the cracks in their carefully constructed world. I knew what they had done, and I knew that I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The judge called the hearing to order, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Richard stood by my side, presenting the case with a calm confidence that I couldn't help but admire. He laid out the facts clearly, how Daniel had tried to manipulate the will, how Thomas, my former lawyer, had been bribed into changing the documents, and how Daniel had acted without my consent or knowledge. As I listened to the testimony, I found it hard to keep my emotions in check. There was something about hearing the truth laid bare that made it all feel even more real. Daniel had taken so much from me, but today he would be held accountable. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my legs unsteady but my voice strong. I took a deep breath and looked across the room at my son and daughter-in-law, who were now staring at me, their faces a mixture of disbelief and contempt. "I didn't expect this," I began, my voice unwavering. "I didn't expect that my own son would try to take something that wasn't his, something that I worked my whole life for. But more than that, I didn't expect him to throw me away, to think so little of me that he would try to erase me from his life." I could see Daniel's eyes flicker, but he didn't say anything. Laura, however, scoffed, crossing her arms in defiance. "I raised him," I continued, my voice louder now, filled with the pain of years of sacrifice. "I loved him, and for years I gave him everything I had, and yet now I'm just a convenience to be discarded when it no longer suits him. This house is not just a building, it's a symbol of everything my husband and I worked for, and I won't let him take it from me. Not like this." The courtroom fell silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. I had said what needed to be said, and now I would wait. Richard stood beside me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and determination. He knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I stood up for myself. Daniel and Laura exchanged a brief look, their confidence shaken. I could see the cracks now, the doubt creeping in. They had underestimated me. And now I had them exactly where I wanted them. The judge turned his attention back to the room. "I'll take this matter under consideration," he said, his voice authoritative. "You will all be notified of my decision within the next few weeks. Until then, I suggest you all refrain from further actions regarding the estate." I stood there for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. It wasn't over yet, but I had done everything I could to ensure that justice would prevail. I had made my stand, and no matter what happened, I knew I would walk out of that courtroom with my head held high. Daniel and Laura stood to leave, their faces tight with anger. They hadn't won yet, but I could see it in their eyes. They knew they had lost the battle. As we walked out of the courthouse, Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did well, Sophie. We've got a good chance." I nodded, but a part of me still felt like I was holding my breath. It wasn't over. Not yet. But I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew I had won something even more important than the house. The days that followed the court hearing were like an eternity. It felt as if time itself had slowed down, stretching into endless moments of uncertainty. I knew the judge's decision wouldn't come immediately, but the waiting was torture. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, only to sink with disappointment when it wasn't the call I had been hoping for. Daniel and Laura had gone quiet after the hearing. I knew they were strategizing, trying to find ways to regain control. I could almost feel the anger and frustration radiating from them, but I couldn't bring myself to care. They had pushed me to my limits, and now they would have to face the consequences. I spent the following days making preparations, just in case the worst happened. I had already decided that no matter the outcome of the trial, I would no longer live my life according to their whims. I was done being silenced, done being the one who always compromised. I had been a good mother, but now it was time to be a good woman to myself. The phone call finally came one Thursday afternoon. "Ms. Sophie, this is Judge Howard's office," the voice on the other end said. "The judge has reached a decision regarding your case. He has requested your presence for a final ruling." My stomach dropped. It was finally happening. I didn't know if I was ready for it, but I knew I had no choice. The drive to the courthouse was quick, but my mind raced the entire way. I thought about Daniel again, about how he had once been my world. I had watched him grow, guided him, and loved him. And now I was standing on the brink of losing everything. But I wasn't going to lose. I couldn't. Not after everything I had been through. Not after everything they had taken from me. When I arrived at the courthouse, Richard was waiting for me outside. His usual confident demeanor was slightly tempered with concern, but he didn't say anything to make me more nervous. We exchanged a few brief words, and then we went inside. The courtroom felt different today. It was colder. There was an air of finality to it all that I couldn't shake. Daniel and Laura were already seated at the table, their faces set in stone. They didn't look like the same people who had once been a part of my life. They were strangers now, people I barely recognized, people who had shown me nothing but contempt. I sat down in my usual seat, trying to ignore the way my heart raced in my chest. Richard stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder for support. The judge entered, and the room went quiet. Judge Howard, a tall man with a stern expression, took his seat and looked at both parties. His gaze lingered on me for a moment before he began speaking. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides, and I've taken into account the testimonies of all involved. It is clear that the actions taken by Daniel and his legal counsel in this case were inappropriate." I felt a slight shiver run down my spine as I heard those words. It was happening. The tide was turning. "However," Judge Howard continued, "I also recognize that Sophie, as the mother, has every right to determine what happens to her property during her lifetime. The house in question—" He looked at the documents in front of him, then back at us. "The house in question will remain under Sophie's name. The change to her will is valid, and it is not to be contested further by Daniel or his wife." I felt a breath leave me, though I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. My chest tightened with a mixture of relief and disbelief. This was it. They had lost. The judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not entirely. It felt like something had shifted in me. For the first time in months, I wasn't the woman being manipulated. I wasn't the one who had to step aside and let others dictate my fate. Daniel's face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Laura's eyes blazed with anger as she shot daggers in my direction, but she said nothing either. Richard turned to me, his voice low. "We've won, Sophie." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the judge, processing the words he had said. My heart, which had been pounding in my chest for what seemed like an eternity, slowly began to calm. I felt like I could breathe again. As we left the courtroom, Daniel and Laura didn't even glance at me. They stormed out, their shoulders stiff with anger. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that the right decision had been made. They couldn't take what was mine anymore. They couldn't take me away from my own life. When I returned home that afternoon, the house felt different. The weight of the battle was finally over. The air was clearer, the house quieter, and the peaceful solitude I had once found here was beginning to return. But as I stepped into my living room and glanced around at the life I had built, I knew that this victory wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my own identity, my own strength. I had fought for myself, and now I would live for myself. The phone rang again, and this time I wasn't afraid to answer it. Sophie. Richard's voice was calm, but there was a note of warmth in it. You did it. I just wanted to say, you were incredible. We'll make sure everything is squared away with the documents. I smiled softly. Thank you, Richard. You've been more than just a lawyer. You've been my ally when I needed one most. We ended the call, and I sat back in my chair, the weight of everything that had happened settling over me. The fight was over, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. It's strange, the way life continues to move forward, even after a moment that feels like it should change everything. The court case was over. The house was mine. But for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting for a place in the world anymore. I had fought for control, for my dignity, for my future. But now that it was all behind me, I was left standing in the quiet aftermath, wondering what came next. The silence in the house felt like a presence of its own. There was no longer the looming tension of the court case hanging over me. But still, something was missing. The joy I thought I'd feel once the dust settled never arrived. Instead, a strange emptiness began to creep in. The first few days after the court hearing were the hardest. My phone was quieter than it had ever been. No calls from Daniel. No angry texts from Laura. It was a hollow victory. What good was winning if you lost the people who mattered most in the process? I found myself staring out the window more than I ever had before. The sea, which had always been my sanctuary, felt distant. The waves were no longer comforting, their rhythmic crashing against the shore now a reminder of everything I had lost. Not just the house, not just the inheritance, but the relationship with my son. I had stood my ground, yes, but I had also lost him in the process, and that hurt more than any loss of property ever could. One evening, as I sat in my living room, the silence grew unbearable. The house felt too large, too empty. The weight of the space around me was oppressive. I reached for the phone and, for the first time in weeks, called one of my friends. Margaret had been there for me when everything had fallen apart, and she always knew the right thing to say, even when I didn't. Sophie, she answered, her voice warm and comforting. How are you holding up? I took a deep breath before responding, trying to find the words. It's over, Margaret. The court case. They lost. The house is mine, but it feels empty. Margaret paused on the other end of the line, and I could hear the wheels turning in her mind. I know you're hurting, but Sophie, you fought for this. You fought for your dignity, for your life. I'm proud of you. I know, I said, my voice cracking. But what good is all of this if it's just me here? If I'm left with this house and nothing else? There was a long silence before Margaret spoke again. Her voice filled with understanding. You're not alone, Sophie. You have your friends, and you have your life. It's not about the house or the inheritance. It's about what you do with the time you have left. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time fighting, so much time focused on the past, that I had forgotten to think about the future. I had forgotten to think about what came next. You're right, I whispered, the weight lifting slightly from my chest. I've spent so long holding on to what's gone. I think it's time to let go. Margaret smiled, her voice soft but firm. You've already won, Sophie. Now it's time to live. Live the way you want to, without all the baggage, without all the anger. Go to the beach, take walks, take up a new hobby. Let yourself breathe again. That night, after our conversation, I sat in silence, thinking over Margaret's words. Slowly, I realized that she was right. I had fought for control, but now I needed to fight for something else, for peace, for myself. I made a decision. I was going to stay in the house, but I wasn't going to let it be a symbol of everything I had lost. It was going to be a place where I could rebuild. I had a lifetime of memories here, some painful, some beautiful, but it didn't have to be a prison. I could fill it with new memories, ones that weren't tied to the past. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I was no longer going to let my son's betrayal define me. I would be the one to decide what my life looked like from here on out. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden light across the sea. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my walking shoes, and headed out the door. I walked along the beach for hours, feeling the cool breeze against my face and the sand beneath my feet. The sound of the waves crashing was no longer an echo of my pain. It was a reminder that life could go on. I could go on. And when I returned home, something inside me felt lighter. I was still here. I still had time. Time to rebuild. Time to redefine what family meant to me. That evening, I sat in front of my fireplace, the crackling fire the only sound filling the room. I was no longer waiting for anyone to tell me what my life should be. I had the power to shape it. I had already survived the hardest part. The phone rang again, and this time, when I answered, it was my son. "Mom," Daniel's voice sounded strained, and I could hear the tension in it. I want to talk." My heart clenched in my chest, but I took a deep breath before replying. "I'm listening." He paused before speaking again, this time softer, more hesitant. I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret what I did. I don't know how we got here, but I want to try to fix things, if you're willing." I stood there in silence for a moment, absorbing his words. For so long, I had wished for this moment, hoping that one day Daniel would come to realize what he had lost. But now, hearing it in his voice, I wasn't sure what to do. I had won the battle, but did that mean I had to fight the war too? "I don't know what to say, Daniel," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm not sure we can just go back to the way things were, but we can start with a conversation." He sighed in relief. "That's all I'm asking for. One conversation." As I sat down on the couch, I realized that this wasn't the end of the story. The house was mine, but there was more to rebuild than just bricks and mortar. It was time to rebuild my relationship with Daniel, if that was even possible. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to try. The days after Daniel's call were a mix of hesitation and hope. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. A small spark of it. The idea that perhaps, just perhaps, there could be a way back from the distance that had grown between us. I spent the next few days thinking about everything that had happened. About the court case, about the betrayal, about the long stretches of silence between me and my son. But I also thought about the memories, the good ones, the ones before Laura had come into the picture, before everything had started to change. I tried to remember what it was like when Daniel would run to me for comfort, when his laughter filled the house, before the greed, before the manipulation. I had no idea if I was ready to forgive him, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to close the door completely. The following Saturday, Daniel called again. This time there was an urgency in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Mom," he said, his words rushed. "Can we meet? In person? I know it's been a while, but I think it's time." I agreed, setting a time and place to meet him. As I hung up the phone, a flood of emotions washed over me. What did I want from this conversation? What did I need? I didn't know if I wanted to go back to the way things had been, but I was willing to listen. I arrived at the cafe early, sitting at a table by the window, watching the world outside. It was one of those crisp mornings when everything feels possible, when the world is still new and full of potential. But inside, I felt the weight of the years between us. I could already feel the knots in my stomach, the uncertainty of what would happen next. And then, he walked in. Daniel looked different, not in a physical sense. He still had that same broad frame and the same familiar, easy smile, but there was something else. A weariness in his eyes that wasn't there before, a heaviness that made me wonder just how much he had been carrying. He approached the table, his usual confidence tempered with a vulnerability I hadn't seen in him in years. "Hey, Mom," he said softly as he sat down across from me. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "You're looking good." He nodded, but his eyes never left mine. "I know this isn't easy, but I've been thinking about everything, and I'm sorry. I can't take back what I did. I can't undo it, but I can try to make it right." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't about me being emotional. This was about hearing him out, hearing what he had to say. I had already decided that I wasn't going to get wrapped up in anger anymore, but that didn't mean I could just forget everything. "I don't know if you can, Daniel," I said quietly. "I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off." "I don't expect that," he replied, his voice low. "But I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to be strangers. I've been so blinded by everything, by Laura, by the house, by all the things I thought I needed, and I I lost sight of what mattered most. His words hit me hard. I had heard all the excuses before, but this time it felt different. He was no longer trying to justify his actions. He was acknowledging them. And that meant something, didn't it? "I've been angry for so long," I said, my voice shaky. "I've been angry at you, at Laura, at myself, and I still don't know if I can forgive you. But I'm willing to try, for both of us." Daniel's eyes softened. He reached across the table, his hand resting on mine. "I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, Mom, but I'm here. I'll be here, no matter what. We don't have to fix everything in one conversation, but I want to try. I want to earn back your trust." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. I hadn't expected this. I had expected more resistance, more defensiveness. But here he was, willing to meet me halfway. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the son I had raised, not the one who had been blinded by greed and manipulation, but the one who had once loved me unconditionally. We spent the next hour talking, not about the house, not about the inheritance or the court case, but about the things that had mattered once, memories, shared moments, things we had lost sight of. Slowly, painfully, the distance between us began to shrink. I still didn't know what the future held for us, but I could feel something shift, a small, fragile bridge being built. As we stood up to leave, Daniel hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I love you." The words were simple, but they held so much weight. I could feel the tears welling up, but I held them back. I wasn't ready to let go of the past entirely. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to move forward, to see where this new version of our relationship could go. When I left the cafe, the world felt a little lighter. I still had a long road ahead of me, and I didn't know if everything would work out, but I felt a flicker of hope that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't over, but maybe it didn't have to be. The weeks that followed that meeting with Daniel felt like a delicate balance, a slow unfolding of trust that had been long broken. It wasn't a quick fix, and I knew it wouldn't be. There was no magic word, no perfect moment that would instantly heal the wounds we had inflicted on each other. But there was something in that conversation, something real and raw, that made me believe there was hope for us. Maybe not the way things were before, but a new beginning, if we were both willing to work for it. I spent the days reflecting on that conversation, revisiting my feelings of hurt and anger, but also allowing myself to feel something else, the tiniest spark of hope. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about letting go of the weight it had carried for so long. And though I didn't know if I was ready to forgive Daniel completely, I was ready to try, to open the door, to just a crack, and see if we could rebuild. Daniel called a few days after our meeting. His voice was tentative, unsure, but there was a sincerity in it that I hadn't heard in years. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I know it's been a few days, but I wanted to check in. How are you?" It was a simple question, but it felt like a gift, a step forward. "I'm okay," I replied, my voice steady but warm. "How about you?" I'm trying," he said, almost apologetically. "I know I've messed up a lot, and I'm not expecting everything to change overnight, but I don't want you to feel like I'm just going to disappear again." I felt a soft knot loosen in my chest. "I don't want that either," I said quietly. "I don't know where this goes, Daniel, but I'm willing to take it one day at a time. Are you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then, his voice, full of emotion, "Yeah, I am. I just want to make it right." We spoke for a while longer, sharing small talk, nothing deep, nothing heavy, but that's what we needed. We needed the small steps, the quiet rebuilding of something that had been shattered. The phone call ended with a promise. We'd talk again soon. As the days went by, I found myself waiting for the next conversation, the next moment when we would take another small step toward healing. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the hurt resurfaced, when I wondered if he truly understood the gravity of what he had done. But each call, each message, brought us closer to something resembling normalcy again. One afternoon, Daniel surprised me by showing up at my doorstep. He was holding a small bouquet of flowers, nothing extravagant. Just a simple gesture, but it was enough to melt something inside me. "I know I can't make up for everything," he said as I opened the door, "but I wanted to do something, to show you I'm really trying. I know I can't take back what I did, but I can start here." I looked at the flowers, then at him, and for the first time in a long time, I saw my son. Not the man who had been blinded by greed, Not the one who had abandoned me, but the boy I had raised, the man who was beginning to show up for me again. "I'm not asking for you to forget, Mom," he continued. I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm going to keep trying." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I hadn't expected this. Not so soon. Not after everything. But as I took the flowers from him, I realized something. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about acknowledging it, facing it together and moving forward, one step at a time. "I'm not ready to forgive everything, Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to let you show me." He smiled, a small but sincere smile. "That's all I'm asking for, Mom. A chance." We stood there in the doorway for a moment, neither of us knowing exactly what would happen next. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't scared. Maybe that was the first real step toward healing, just allowing ourselves to try, even when we weren't sure where the road would take us. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner. Just the two of us. No Laura, no pressure, just us. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an apology wrapped in words. It was a dinner, a conversation, a chance to simply be mother and son again. And as I sat across from him, listening to his voice as he told me about his life, his job, his struggles, I realized something important. We were both different. We had changed. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe we could still find our way back to each other. It wouldn't be the same. It couldn't be. But we could build something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. By the time dinner was over, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my son back. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could take the next step, and that, in itself, was enough. The next few months were filled with the slow, steady rhythm of rebuilding, not just a house, but a life, a family. After the dinner with Daniel, there were many more conversations, many more moments of vulnerability and growth. The road wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, moments of discomfort when old wounds would resurface. But little by little, we began to find our way back to each other. Daniel began to call more often. Sometimes it was to talk about small things, work, his friends, his day. Sometimes it was to ask for advice. It wasn't always easy for either of us, but I started to realize that this was how it was supposed to be. This wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about learning how to live in the mess, how to forgive ourselves and each other for the mistakes that had been made. One day, a few months after our first conversation, Daniel came over with a small box in hand. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I heard his voice calling from the living room. "Mom, you got a minute?" I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked into the living room, surprised to see him standing there, looking a little nervous, holding the box in his hands. "What's this?" I asked, a little confused. I hadn't expected any gifts. Not from him, not after everything. "I just wanted to give you something," he said, holding the box out to me. "Something to show you I'm serious about trying." I took the box from his hands, feeling the weight of it. When I opened it, I found a small, delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a heart. It was simple, but beautiful. A quiet gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "I saw this," Daniel continued, "and it made me think of you, about everything we've been through, about the fact that you've always had my heart, even when I didn't deserve it. I don't know if this makes up for everything, but I wanted you to know I'm not giving up on us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I stared at the necklace. It wasn't the gift that mattered so much. It was the meaning behind it. Daniel was trying. He was showing up, not just for me, but for himself, for us. I could barely speak, but I nodded and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Daniel. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive everything completely, but I'm so proud of you, and I'm proud of us." From that moment on, things continued to improve between us. There was still work to be done, still scars to heal, but the foundation had been rebuilt. Slowly, we found our way back to each other, no longer trying to return to what we had been, but building something new, something more honest. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson in those months. I had spent so much time fighting, so much time holding on to what was, that I had forgotten to look forward, to live in the present, to allow space for growth and change. The house, the legacy of my late husband and me, and no longer felt like a burden. It had become a home again, a place where I could find peace. I spent my days focusing on the things I enjoyed. The mornings were for walks on the beach, the afternoons for reading and cooking. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and started letting go of the anger that had weighed me down for so long. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the ocean, I realized that this was my life now. It was mine to live, mine to shape. I wasn't defined by my past, by my mistakes, or by the people who had hurt me. I was defined by what I chose to do from here on out. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. There was no perfect ending. There was no fairy tale reconciliation. But there was something even better. A new beginning. A chance to live authentically, to be free from the shackles of the past, and to build the kind of life I had always deserved. As I sat there, the sound of the waves crashing softly in the distance, I smiled to myself. It was over. The battle, the pain, the hurt, it was behind me. And now I could finally breathe. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.